A woman has no place buying a drink here. Go get your husband, sweetheart. The words, slick with unearned confidence and cheap beer, cut through the low murmur of the dockside tavern. The crowd, a mix of young Marines and seasoned sailors, rippled with nervous laughter. They turned to look, their faces a mixture of pity and cruel anticipation. The target of the insult, a woman sitting alone at the bar, did not flinch. She did not turn. She simply continued to gaze at the dark, swirling contents of her glass, a simple club soda with a lime, her posture a study in serene indifference. Her hair was pulled back in a simple, unadorned knot, and she wore a plain gray jacket over a simple white shirt and jeans, the uniform of civilian anonymity. There was nothing about her that demanded attention, and in this world of loud boasts and crisp uniforms, that was a sin. The Marine, a corporal with a chest puffed out by his recent deployment and 2 more drinks than his better judgment could handle, took her silence as weakness. He saw a target, not a person. But when the base commander, General Marlowe, later saw the security footage, he wouldn't see a victim. He would see a predator in repose, a lioness allowing a jackal to dance at the edge of its kill radius. And he would understand the profound, terrifying calm that precedes a storm of consequence. If you believe that true strength doesn't need to announce itself, type respect below. The corporal, whose name was Evans, swaggered closer, emboldened by the complicit silence of his peers. He was the king of this small, sticky-floored kingdom, a hero in his own mind, and this woman was a disruption to his narrative. He saw her not as a human being, but as an anomaly, an unwelcome variable in the rigid, masculine equation of his world. "Hey, I'm talking to you," he slurred, his voice louder now, demanding the attention he felt was his due. He leaned over her, invading her personal space, his shadow falling across her small table. The air thickened with the scent of stale alcohol and something else, the acrid smell of unchecked arrogance. He saw her hands, resting calmly on the cool, damp surface of the bar. They were not delicate or manicured. The knuckles were slightly calloused, the nails clipped short and clean. They were hands that knew work, that understood tools, that could apply force with practiced precision, but he was too blinded by his own prejudice to read the story they told. He saw only a woman, and in his narrow worldview, that meant she was less. The bartender, a tired man who had seen 1,000 nights like this one, made a tentative move to intervene, but a sharp look from one of Evans's friends froze him in place. This was the Corps' business, the look said, and civilians were not welcome. So he polished a glass and watched, a silent accessory to the unfolding humiliation. The woman finally, slowly, lifted her eyes from her drink. They were the color of a winter sea, deep and cold and unreadable. There was no fear in them. There was no anger. There was nothing but a profound, almost analytical stillness. She looked at him, truly looked at him, for a single, piercing second, and in that moment, she saw everything. The insecurity masquerading as bravado, the desperate need for validation from the pack, the hollow core of a man who measured his worth by how small he could make others feel. She saw his entire service record in the slump of his shoulders and the desperate set of his jaw. He was a follower, a bully, a liability. And then she looked away, back to her glass, a dismissal so complete, so utterly dismissive, that it was more insulting than any retort. This infuriated him. It was a rejection of his very existence, of his perceived authority. He needed a reaction. He needed to provoke the fear he believed was his right to command. With a grunt of frustration, he shoved her shoulder. It wasn't a violent blow, but it was aggressive, demeaning. It was a physical punctuation to his verbal assault, a final declaration of his dominance. The stool scraped back a few inches. A few drops of her club soda sloshed onto the bar. And still, she did not react. She simply reached out with that same unnerving calm and used a single, steady finger to slide her stool back to its original position. The silence that followed was different. It was no longer complicit. It was confused. The jackal had bitten, and the lioness had not even bothered to twitch. The tension in the room coiled into a tight, brittle spring, and everyone felt it. Something was wrong with this picture. The predictable script of barroom bullying had been thrown out, and no one, least of all Corporal Evans, knew the new lines. His bravado began to curdle into a sour mix of confusion and a nascent, terrifying suspicion that he had just made the single greatest mistake of his entire life. He had mistaken stillness for weakness and silence for surrender. He had failed to understand that in the world of true professionals, the most dangerous people are the ones who have nothing to prove. They don't raise their voice because their voice can level cities. They don't threaten because their actions are the only threat that matters. He had just pushed a woman who commanded fleets, a woman whose name was spoken in hushed, reverent tones in the Pentagon and the classified briefing rooms of global command centers. He had just laid his hands on Admiral Catherine Hayes, and the universe was about to correct his error with brutal, beautiful precision. The moment stretched, thin and humming with unspoken tension. Then it shattered, not with a shout, but with a series of sharp, staccato beeps that cut through the bar's low din. Every service member in the room instinctively froze, their heads snapping towards the large television mounted above the bar. The local news broadcast was interrupted by a breaking report, the screen flashing a stark red banner. Naval alert. Typhoon Kestrel unexpected deviation. Carrier strike group 7 at risk. A map appeared, showing the Pacific Ocean. A swirling, angry red mass representing the super typhoon had taken a sudden, impossibly sharp turn, placing it on a direct collision course with a cluster of blue icons that represented the USS Ronald Reagan and its escort fleet. A panicked-looking reporter began speaking in rushed, breathless tones about catastrophic storm surges, waves the size of buildings, and the loss of all communication with the strike group's command ship. For the men in the bar, this was not abstract news. This was their world. Some of them had friends, brothers, mentors on those very ships. The atmosphere shifted instantly from drunken antagonism to sober, professional dread. Corporal Evans, his petty conflict forgotten, began to pontificate loudly. They need to turn into the swell, hard to port, he declared, speaking to his friends, but loud enough for the whole bar to hear. Punch through the storm wall. Standard procedure, another Marine chimed in. Nah, man, you gotta scatter the fleet. Disperse and ride it out. Minimize the target, they argued, their voices filled with the confident, theoretical knowledge of men who had read the books but had never commanded the storm. They were playing checkers while a grandmaster was about to play chess. Admiral Hayes, meanwhile, moved with an economy of motion that was breathtaking in its efficiency. She slid off her stool, her previous stillness replaced by a fluid, purposeful grace. She bypassed the arguing Marines without a glance, her focus absolute. She walked to a small, secluded booth in the back corner of the bar, a space no one ever used. From the inside pocket of her plain gray jacket, she produced an object that made the bartender's eyes widen. A compact, military-grade iridium satellite phone. It was flat, black, and utterly out of place in this dingy establishment. She didn't fumble with it. Her fingers moved with the practiced familiarity of a surgeon selecting an instrument. With a press of a button, the small antenna extended. She held it to her ear, her other hand resting flat on the table, a point of anchor in a world tipping into chaos. The change in her was profound. The unassuming civilian had vanished, replaced by something else entirely. Her posture straightened, her shoulders squared, and an aura of command, of absolute, unshakable authority, descended upon her like a mantle. It was a presence so powerful it had its own gravity, and one by one, the patrons of the bar fell silent, their own conversations dying as they found themselves drawn to the quiet drama unfolding in the corner. She began to speak, and her voice was the most shocking thing of all. It was the same quiet, low-pitched voice, but it was now imbued with a tone of pure, unadulterated command. It was a voice that did not request or suggest. It stated, it ordered, it shaped reality. It was a voice accustomed to being obeyed without question, a voice that carried the weight of immense responsibility. And the words she spoke were a foreign language of expertise, a litany of technical jargon and strategic imperatives that silenced the amateurish speculation of the Marines. This is Sea Dragon, she said, her voice a calm, Clear signal in the growing storm of panic. Authenticate Sierra November 9 or 2. I am overriding local command authority under protocol Cobalt 0. Acknowledge. There was a pause, a brief crackle of static audible even from across the room. Then she continued, her words painting a vivid picture of high-stakes naval maneuvering. Retask satellite surveillance to Grid 4-7 Alpha. I need real-time thermal imaging of the eye wall. Scramble the Seahawks from Kadena. Full rescue loadout. They are to hold at the 200 nautical mile perimeter. Do not engage the storm front. Her eyes were distant, focused on a map no one else could see. She was visualizing the entire battle space, moving destroyers and cruisers like pieces on a celestial chessboard. Corporal Evans and his friends stood frozen, their mouths slightly agape. The tactical solutions they had been shouting just moments before now seemed like the naive babbling of children. This woman was speaking a language of command they had only ever read about in training manuals. She was not quoting procedure. She was writing it in real time, with thousands of lives and billions of dollars of hardware hanging in the balance. Tell the Reagan to cease evasive maneuvers. Her turning radius is too wide. She'll expose her beam to the primary wavefront. Order her to maintain current heading and decrease speed to 9 knots. I want her to take the initial surge head-on. It's her only chance. A collective, sharp intake of breath swept through the bar. The order was counterintuitive, terrifying. It was like telling a man to walk into a punch instead of dodging it. It was an act of supreme, calculated risk, a decision that could only be made by someone who understood the complex physics of a supercarrier and the hydrodynamics of a rogue wave with an intimacy that bordered on prescience. She listened for a moment, then spoke again, her voice dropping even lower, becoming more precise. Divert power from non-essential systems to the primary gyrostabilizers. I want every ounce of energy focused on keeping her level. And give me the damage control officer on the USS Princeton. I have reports of flight deck fire. I need a status update. Now, she was not just managing a fleet. She was managing a dozen different crises at once, her mind a whirlwind of data, probabilities, and decisive action. The bar was now utterly, deathly silent. The only sounds were the hum of the beer coolers, the frantic voice of the reporter on the television, and the calm, authoritative voice of the woman in the gray jacket. The contrast was dizzying. On the screen, chaos reigned. In the corner of the bar, absolute control presided. The onlookers, from the bartender to the youngest Marine, were witnessing a masterclass in crisis leadership. They were seeing what true competence looked like, stripped bare the uniform, the medals, and the ceremony. It was not about shouting or posturing. It was about a quiet mind, a steady hand, and the courage to make impossible decisions in the face of overwhelming odds. Corporal Evans felt a cold dread seeping into his bones. The woman he had insulted, the woman he had pushed, was not just some civilian. She was a commander. The realization dawned on him not as a single thought, but as a slow, creeping horror. Every detail clicked into place. Her unnerving calm, her analytical gaze, her refusal to be provoked. It wasn't weakness. It was discipline. It was the complete and total self-control of a professional who operated on a plane of existence he couldn't even begin to comprehend. He had not just insulted a woman. He had assaulted a commanding officer. The magnitude of his transgression began to crash down upon him with the force of the very typhoon she was now battling with her words. The main door of the tavern burst open with a crash that made everyone jump. 2 uniformed shore patrol officers, clad in crisp service whites and armed with sidearms, stormed in, their faces grim and set for trouble. Behind them, moving with a deliberate, heavy authority, was the base master-at-arms, Master Chief Petty Officer Franklin, a man whose face looked like it had been carved from naval tradition itself. Franklin was a legend on the base, a figure of immense and immediate respect. His presence alone was enough to quell riots. He had received a frantic, half-coherent call from the bartender about a Marine harassing a civilian, but the call had been cut short by the sudden base-wide alert. Now, he was here to restore order, his eyes scanning the room, expecting to find a brawl in progress. Instead, he found a scene of bizarre, suspended animation. The bar was packed with service members, but they were all silent, their attention fixed on a back booth. He saw the source of their fascination, a woman in civilian clothes, speaking calmly into a satellite phone. He saw Corporal Evans, pale and sweating, looking like a man who had just seen a ghost. Franklin's brow furrowed in confusion. This was not the scene he had expected. He started to move forward, his voice ready to boom out a command to disperse, but then he caught the cadence of the woman's voice. He heard the words she was using. "Negative, Captain," she was saying, her tone firm but not harsh. "Do not launch the E-2. The crosswinds at that altitude are beyond operational limits. You'll risk a catastrophic shear. We will be blind, but we will be safe. Hold your position. Sea Dragon out, Sea Dragon." The call sign hit Master Chief Franklin like a physical blow. It was a code name he had heard only once before in a top-secret briefing years ago. It was a designation reserved for a single person, a flag officer in command of the theater of operations. It was a name that carried with it the full weight and authority of the United States Navy. His professional training took over, overriding his confusion. He slowed his approach, his eyes narrowing, studying her. He didn't recognize her face, but he recognized the mantle of command she wore so effortlessly. He saw the straightness of her spine, the absolute focus in her eyes. He saw the way her left hand, the one not holding the phone, was resting on the table, not clenched in a fist of stress, but open, relaxed, a picture of a mind in total control of the chaos. He stopped a respectful 10 feet away from the booth. He did not shout. He did not interrupt. He simply stood and waited. He had been in the Navy for 30 years, and he knew a commanding officer when he saw one, uniform or no uniform. He recognized the species. When she finally clicked the phone off and placed it on the table, the silence in the room became absolute. She took a slow, deliberate breath, her shoulders relaxing slightly, the immense weight of command lifting for a moment. Then, she looked up and her eyes met his. Franklin took a single, precise step forward. "Ma'am," he began, his voice a low, respectful rumble. "Master Chief Franklin, Base Master at Arms. Forgive the intrusion." He paused, then asked a question that would change everything, using a formal verification phrase. "I am required to ask, ma'am, do you have a status report from Titan Spear?" Her response was immediate, crisp, and correct. "Titan Spear is secure. The fleet is weathering the storm. The Reagan reports minor deck damage, but is stable. The Princeton has contained the fire. We were lucky," her use of the word "we" was telling. She wasn't an observer. She was the commander. Franklin's entire demeanor shifted. He straightened his back until it was ramrod straight. He drew his arms to his sides, his hands flat. He looked past her at the entire room of stunned sailors and Marines, and his voice exploded with a power that rattled the beer bottles on the shelves. "Attention on deck." The command was instinctual, primal. Every single service member in that bar, from the lowest seaman apprentice to the most seasoned gunnery sergeant, snapped to their feet. Chairs scraped, boots slammed against the floorboards, and in less than a second, the entire room was at rigid, perfect attention, their eyes locked forward. Corporal Evans, who had been swaying on his feet, jolted as if struck by lightning, his body locking into the position of attention so violently it was a miracle he didn't fall over. The silence that followed was more profound than any before it. It was a silence of shock, of dawning comprehension, and of absolute, unconditional military respect. Master Chief Franklin then turned back to the woman in the gray jacket. He executed a salute so sharp, so precise it could have cut glass. It was not the perfunctory salute given to a junior officer. It was the deep, reverent salute reserved for the highest echelons of command, a gesture of profound respect for the rank and the person who held it. "Admiral Hayes, ma'am," he said, his voice now filled with a mixture of awe and professional formality. "My apologies. We were not aware you were on base." The name and the rank descended upon the room like a bomb. "Admiral, not a captain, not a commander. An admiral, a 4-star admiral, a rank so lofty, so rare, that most service members go their entire careers without ever being in the same room as one." The title echoed in the stunned silence. each syllable a hammer blow to the foundation of Corporal Evans's reality. He felt the blood drain from his face, a cold, sickening sensation spreading through his gut. He had pushed an admiral. He had told a four-star admiral, a woman who commanded the entire Pacific Fleet, to go get her husband. The sheer, galactic stupidity of his actions threatened to buckle his knees. The narrator's voice seems to step in, a disembodied authority cataloging the truth now laid bare. Unit, Commander, U.S. Pacific Fleet. Combat hours, over 4,000 F, 14 Tomcat, and F/18 Super Hornet. Medals. The Distinguished Service Medal, the Legion of Merit with 3 gold stars, the Distinguished Flying Cross with Valor Device. Mission classifications. Top secret / code word. She was not just an admiral. She was a legend. A warrior scholar who had graduated with honors from Annapolis, flown combat missions over Iraq, commanded a guided missile destroyer, then an aircraft carrier, and now one of the most powerful naval forces on the planet. She was Catherine Sea Dragon Hayes, a name whispered with reverence by allies and with fear by adversaries. She returned the Master Chief's salute with a brief, efficient nod. "At ease, Master Chief," she said, her voice once again calm and quiet. And at ease. Everyone, a collective exhale of breath, swept the room as the service members relaxed, though they remained standing, their eyes wide with disbelief and awe. Admiral Hayes then let her gaze drift across the room until it settled on Corporal Evans. Her eyes were not angry. They were not accusatory. They were worse. They were disappointed. It was the look of a leader who had been let down not personally, but professionally. It was the look of a commander who saw a failure in the system, a flaw in the character of one of her own. "Corporal," she said, and her quiet voice seemed to shake the very walls. "You have a question for me?" Evans could not speak. His throat was a knot of pure terror. He could only shake his head, a tiny, pathetic movement. "I believe," she continued, her voice level and devoid of emotion, "your words were that a woman had no place buying a drink here. Is that correct?" Evans's face, which had been pale, now turned a blotchy, mortified red. He managed to stammer out a single word. "Ma'am, I am not your ma'am in this context, Corporal," she corrected him, her voice cutting like a shard of ice. "Right now, I am the woman you believed had no place here. I am the woman you felt entitled to touch. I am the assumption you made, and I am the reality you failed to see. Your error in judgment tonight was not just a personal failing. It was a tactical one. You failed to assess a situation. You failed to recognize a potential threat, or, in this case, a potential asset. You saw gender, not a person. In my world, Corporal, an assumption like that can get your entire unit killed. It can lose a battle. It can start a war. Each word was a perfectly placed shot, dismantling his arrogance, his prejudice, his entire sense of self. She wasn't just reprimanding him. She was teaching him, deconstructing his failure with the cold, precise logic of a strategist. The Master Chief stepped forward. "Ma'am, I will take custody of the Corporal. He will be disciplined to the fullest extent of the Uniform Code of Military Justice." Admiral Hayes held up a hand. "No, Master Chief. That would be too easy. The UCMJ is for punishing soldiers. I'm more interested in building them. His punishment will be his education. Corporal Evans, you will report to my flag aide at 0600 tomorrow morning. You are on my personal staff until further notice. You will carry my briefcase. You will learn the names of every man and woman on every ship in this fleet. You will learn that competence, courage, and command have no gender. You will learn respect. Am I understood?" Evans could only nod, his eyes locked on the floor, the weight of her words a physical burden. He understood. He finally, truly understood. The story of the Admiral and the Corporal spread through the base like wildfire, then across the fleet, and eventually into the annals of naval lore. It was told in the barracks late at night, in the mess decks during long sea voyages, and in the ready rooms of fighter squadrons. Each telling embellished the details, polishing the event into a modern military fable. In some versions, the Admiral stared down the typhoon itself, her will alone turning the storm from its path. In others, she disarmed the belligerent Marine with a single, perfectly executed martial arts move. The truth, as is often the case, was quieter, more profound, and far more powerful. It was the story of a woman whose quiet competence had so thoroughly and completely dismantled a man's loud arrogance that it had recalibrated his entire being. Corporal Evans, as promised, reported to her office at 0600 the next day. The first week was a blur of humiliation and terror. He stood in a corner of her office, a silent witness to a world he never knew existed. He watched her conduct video conferences with senators, strategize with four-star generals, and brief the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He saw the immense, crushing weight of the decisions she made every single day, decisions that affected global security and the lives of hundreds of thousands of personnel. He saw the respect she commanded, a respect born not of her rank, but of her intelligence, her integrity, and her unwavering dedication. He carried her briefcase, which felt heavier than his rucksack on a forced march, weighted as it was with classified documents that shaped the world. He learned the names of the ships, but more than that, he learned the names of the sailors. He watched as she grieved with the family of a young petty officer lost in a training accident, her compassion as real and as deep as her command was absolute. His arrogance was sandblasted away, layer by painful layer, replaced by a deep, humbling, and transformative respect. He stopped seeing her as a female admiral. He started seeing her as his admiral. He began to understand that her silence in the bar was not passivity. It was the practiced discipline of a leader who conserves their energy for the battles that matter. Her calm was not weakness. It was the bedrock of strength upon which entire fleets depended. He was not just punished, he was reforged. The patrons of the Dockside Tavern, now unofficially nicknamed the Admiral's Perch, spoke of that night in hushed tones. The stool where she had sat was cordoned off with a simple velvet rope by the owner, a silent monument to the lesson learned there. A small, brass plaque was eventually affixed to the bar beneath it, engraved with a single, powerful quote attributed to her from that night's events, though no one was sure who said it first. Assumptions are the anchor of failure. The story became a teaching tool, a cautionary tale for new arrivals at the base. Senior NCOs would tell it to their young, cocky charges to remind them that the uniform does not define the warrior, and that respect is a currency that must be earned from everyone, regardless of their appearance. The legend of that night was not about the public shaming of a foolish corporal. It was about the quiet, irrefutable power of demonstrated competence. It was a testament to the idea that true authority is not taken, but given, and it is given to those who prove their worth through action, not words. The ripple effect of her quiet professionalism spread, subtly changing the culture, reinforcing the highest ideals of the service. Years passed. The incident at the Admiral's Perch became a cornerstone of leadership training at the Naval Academy. It was a case study in de-escalation, in crisis management, and in the critical importance of challenging one's own biases. Admiral Catherine Hayes continued her storied career, eventually becoming the first female chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, her calm demeanor and strategic brilliance guiding the nation's military through a period of unprecedented global instability. She never spoke of that night in a bar publicly. She didn't need to. The lesson had taken on a life of its own, becoming part of the institutional DNA of the service she loved. Her legacy was not in the single event, but in the thousands of better leaders it created. And Corporal Evans? He was no longer a corporal. Gunnery Sergeant Evans stood before a group of newly minted Marines, their faces young, eager, and full of the same unearned confidence he once possessed. He was now a respected instructor at the School of Infantry, known for his demanding standards, but also for his profound wisdom. He was telling them a story. "Let me tell you about the biggest mistake I ever made," he began, his voice steady and sure. "It was a mistake that saved my life, my career, and my honor. It was the day I learned that the most dangerous person in the room is never the loudest one. It's the one who is listening, the one who is watching, the one who has nothing to prove because they have already proven it all, time and time again. When it mattered most, he told them the story of the bar, of his own foolish pride, and of the admiral who commanded a fleet with a quiet voice from a corner booth. He didn't spare himself in the telling. He laid his own ignorance and prejudice bare for them to see, offering his own humiliation as a shield to protect them from making the same mistake. Your weapon is not your rifle, he told them, his gaze sweeping over the young faces. It is your character. Your strength is not in your fists, but in your discipline. And your honor is not in how you treat your superiors, but in how you treat the person you believe has nothing to offer you. Look past the surface. See the person. Acknowledge their humanity. Because you never, ever know who you're talking to. A young Marine, bold and curious, raised his hand. Gunny, what happened after? With the Admiral, Gunnery Sergeant Evans allowed a small, rare smile to touch his lips. It was a smile of deep, abiding respect. She made me a better Marine, he said simply. She taught me that leadership isn't about being in charge. It's about taking care of those in your charge. And sometimes that means showing a foolish young corporal the difference between arrogance and authority. He saw the understanding dawning in their eyes, and he knew the lesson had been passed on. The legacy of that night was not a plaque on a wall or a story in a book. It was here, in the character of the next generation of warriors, a legacy of quiet competence, of earned respect, and of the profound truth that the strongest leaders are not the ones who make the most noise, but the ones whose silence carries the weight of the world. The quiet professionalism Admiral Hayes demonstrated that evening became a philosophy, a creed passed down through the ranks. It was a way of being that championed substance over style, action over words, and humility over hubris. Her legacy was not carved in stone monuments, but woven into the very fabric of the men and women she led. It was present in the pilot who ran through their pre-flight checklist with meticulous, silent focus. It was present in the ship's navigator who calmly corrected a course in rough seas without needing to announce their cleverness. It was present in the young squad leader who listened to the quietest member of their team, knowing that wisdom often comes in a whisper, not a shout. The story taught a generation of service members that true strength was an internal quality, a core of tempered steel forged in discipline and experience that required no external validation. It was the understanding that the uniform, the rank, the medals, they were symbols of a responsibility, not licenses for arrogance. They were reminders of standard to be met, a duty to be fulfilled, a trust to be honored. The world is full of noise, of people shouting to be heard, demanding attention, proclaiming their own greatness. But true worth is proven in the silent crucible of crisis. It is revealed in the steady hand that guides the ship through the storm, in the calm voice that brings order to chaos, in the unwavering eye that sees the truth of a situation while others are blinded by their own assumptions. The lesson of Admiral Hayes was a timeless one. Let your actions be your argument. Let your competence be your creed. The respect that follows will be real, it will be earned, and it will be enduring. Her single, quiet act of command in a dingy bar had a more lasting impact on the fighting spirit of the Navy and the Marine Corps than a dozen grand speeches, because it was real. It was a demonstration, not a declaration. It showed them that the highest form of power is the power that is so confident in itself, it feels no need to display it. It is the power of the quiet professional, the silent warrior, the leader who is defined not by the noise they make, but by the deafening silence of a job perfectly done. This principle extends far beyond the military. It is a universal truth for anyone who seeks to lead, to create, to build something of lasting value. In business, it is the quiet CEO whose methodical strategy outmaneuvers the flashy, self-promoting rival. In science, it is the patient researcher whose years of silent, painstaking work lead to a breakthrough that changes the world. In art, it is the dedicated creator who toils in obscurity, perfecting their craft, letting the work speak for itself. True legacy isn't what you leave behind in words. It's what continues forward in the actions of others. It is the standard you set, the example you live, the quiet competence that inspires those around you to be better, to reach higher, to listen more carefully. Admiral Hayes never sought to become a legend. She simply sought to do her duty to the best of her extraordinary ability. In doing so, she became one. Her story serves as a permanent reminder that character is the true measure of a person, and that the most profound impact is often made by those who move quietly, act decisively, and let their results speak for them. The world will always have its share of Corporal Evanses, loud, insecure, and quick to judge. But they are no match for the quiet strength of an Admiral Hayes, a strength that is calm, competent, and utterly, unshakably professional. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where character defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.